Morning, everybody. My name is Randy Snow. I'm the Vice President and Operations Officer for United Infrastructure Group. We are a group of engineers and contractors. And on behalf of our company and Carolinas AGC and AGC of America, I want to welcome everybody here. It's certainly impressive to see so many national, regional, state, and local leaders come together at one time to address this very important issue facing our country and our state. You'll hear two words here often during these sessions: transportation and infrastructure. Transportation is a big part of the infrastructure needs of this country and this region and this state, but it's not the only part. There certainly is a need for discussion about rail. There is a need for discussion about our ports and our airports and even our water and sewer infrastructure, our power grid. You can go on and on. This nation needs to address its infrastructure that we're world renowned for having created. We need to address how to maintain it and modernize it. I've spent my whole career in the transportation industry, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that while we're waiting for some of our panelists to come back. The issues that we have, we mentioned a minute ago, both speakers mentioned a minute ago the federal initiative back in 1956 when we created the interstate system. That was a time when our country came together. We debated the issue, we debated the need, we made a decision, we committed to fund it, and we built the interstate system in this country. We became the envy of the world with our interstate system. Similarly, in South Carolina, and coincidentally, about the same time, South Carolina debated the issue of paving rural roads, the farm to market program, getting the people in the countryside better access to come to the cities. So in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, South Carolina embarked on a similar program of building roads and building a tremendous system for South Carolina, the farm-to-market system. We became the envy of the region. We were known for our roads and the quality of our roads and how well the people in the countryside could travel back and forth to the cities. That initiative also helped South Carolina wind up with 42,000 miles of state-maintained highways, the fourth largest highway system in America. South Carolina has the privilege of operating the fourth largest state-maintained highway system in America. That's amazing. We have to do that with the third or fourth smallest budget per mile of any state in America. It's a recipe for disaster. That's an issue that we have to face. Both these systems, these magnificent systems, the federal system and the state system, have been neglected too long. Today we face a big dilemma. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue to march with the way we've always done? Or are we going to finally do the right thing, meet, debate, make a decision, commit to funding it, and rebuild and modernize both systems, our federal system and our state system? You know, one of the things, both systems, I guess, were, they were formalized, and the purpose was that a good highway system, a transportation system, a good road system provided economic growth, continued economic growth, business development. It provided an increase in quality of life for our citizens, and it was the backbone, especially with the interstate system, of our national defense system. It's now time for us to do something about maintaining it and upgrading it. When both of these initiatives, back in the 1950s and 60s, we were coming out of post-World War II employment issues. We weren't that far away from the Great Depression and employment issues. Both of these initiatives, the federal initiative with the interstate system, the state of South Carolina initiative with our farm to market program, put people to work. And it put people to work and built things that you can see. It wasn't spending money on something you couldn't see. It was investing money so when you got through doing it, you could look at it and ride on it and use it. And I think my belief, and I think many of you here will agree that investing in upgrading and modernizing our national and local highway systems is a way that we're going to find to put America back to work and get us out of this depression or recession, whatever we're going to call it. I'll get off my soapbox, and today we have the first panel. I've got the privilege of introducing the members of the panel. I guess we'll seat the members first. Buck Limehouse, our Secretary of Transportation. By the way, every speaker, yesterday we had 2 speakers, and 2 times we talked about infrastructure bank. And both speakers this morning have talked about a national infrastructure bank. We've recognized that South Carolina was the first state in the union to have an infrastructure bank. It still holds the record for having the most projects built by a state infrastructure bank. And as Secretary LaHood said, they're taking a page out of South Carolina's infrastructure bank book and use it as a model for a national system. All of that began when Secretary Limehouse was chairman of our Highway Commission. And we recognize that and thank you for that. We also have Brian Miller. Brian, the Director of Marketing and Public Relations for South Carolina Ports Authority. Ron Mitchum is Executive Director of the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments, and Mayor Joe Riley, who I assume will be back here in a minute. To moderate this, we're privileged to have Rick Giroux, President of the Art Institute of Charleston. And Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm sure with your position that you are a very creative person, so it's going to take all of your talents to make this thing look pretty. Thank you very much.
I assume a number of you are wondering, as I am, why a president of an art college would be asked to moderate this panel. The simplest answer is Mayor Riley asked me to, and as those of you who are from Charleston, this area know that when the mayor asks you to do something, you normally do it. But the second reason is I was trying to figure out what is the thing that comes across my desk most as a student complaint. And it has to do with how do we get to classes and where do we park. So this whole issue of transportation is really an important one to us. We're located right at the intersection of East Bay and Market, so anything that affects the port affects us. If a heavy rain coincides with a high tide, Market Street floods, and the front of our building becomes Lake Art Institute. So anything having to do with drainage certainly affects us. Our students come from all over the area, but faculty and staff travel I-26 on a daily basis, or Route 17 on a daily basis. So anything having to do with those areas certainly does affect us. So the mayor's not here, and I want to try to get this going as quickly as possible. And I think the themes that I was told that we really want to explore today is the importance of infrastructure and infrastructure investments, how we move goods and services quickly and efficiently throughout the region, local challenges such as flooding, traffic congestion, public transportation, bridges, ports, and what needs to be done going forward at all levels of government to address and finance the infrastructure challenges that face us. So Where do we want to begin? The mayor's not here, but let me ask the three of you, what do you see as the most pressing infrastructure or transportation challenges facing us today? And whoever wants to begin.
Well, let me start, and the mayor's going to join us now, and he and I will probably be, we'll have a lot of simpatico on some of the things that we're going to tell you, and he's probably the most innovative mayor in America, and we've tried to be the most innovative the DOT in America. And so Governor Rendell has been dragging me around to different cities to sing his praises on his ideas that I concur with, and he's a great guy, and we've just had a great time working with him. But what we need is a comprehensive plan that makes sense to the American people and to the people of Charleston and South Carolina, that we can join together and finance properly so that the job can get done.
Again, my name is Byron Miller from the South Carolina State Ports Authority. I am pinch hitting today. Our Chief Commercial Officer, Paul McClintock, returned from 3 weeks out making calls on customers last night at 12:30, and he returned to a garage and house full of water. So 12:30 this morning, but that leads into my next point, which is, I think, the priority for today, maybe somewhat of a pun, but there are three things important, I think, to our port right now. Dredging, and dredging. So deep water is, I guess, the #1 issue, and it's been covered all across the media right now. It's been discussed earlier about National Highway System and the infrastructure that we have as a base. That obviously, if you were to go to a conference 5 years ago, everything you heard was about the looming gridlock and our crumbling infrastructure. We got a break, frankly, when it comes to that. This issue is going to return again when our economy returns, not if, when it returns. So it's essential that we deal with both the landside infrastructure and then the waterside infrastructure. So ships are getting bigger. We've had over 300 post-Panamax ships already in the Port of Charleston, 4 years before this $5 billion expansion of the Panama Canal is complete. So this isn't something for tomorrow. This is an infrastructure issue for today. We have to be able to get the ships in and out. We have to be able to get the cargo in and out from the inland locations. This is a lot bigger than just South Carolina or Charleston. We have 25,000 companies around the nation that use our port. So I guess if I had to order it in that priority, I would say 1, 2, and 3 are our harbor, our harbor, our harbor.
Well, I'm Ron Mitchum with the Council of Governments and the CHATS MPO, the Transportation Planning Organization under the Federal Transportation Planning Program. And for us, it's simply an issue of funding. We certainly have more than enough plans that identify all these projects that you are all familiar with that need to be accomplished, not 5 and 10 years down the road, but need to be done today. So it's really an issue of more funding. But you know, certainly in looking at the infrastructure specifically, certainly the interchange of 526 and 26 and continued improvements to I-26 need to be in place in order to support our economy and particularly the port. We'll be undertaking a freight study early next year to look at what the port's going to need in the way of infrastructure improvements on I-26 to be able to move those goods. But again, at the end of the day, it's one more document that demonstrates that we need increased funding to address some of those issues out there.
Mayor, let me repeat the question to you. I said, while you were out, I commented that you know, why would I be here, president of an art college? And I said, it's because you asked me. So I'll ask you the first question. What do you see as the most pressing infrastructure or transportation needs in the area?
Well, there are several. I'll talk about rail for a minute. There are two components, two forms of rail we're working on. One is to deal with commuter rush hours, and that is the commuter rail, which would use the rail infrastructure, basically Norfolk Southern's, that runs from above Somerville down into the peninsula, and use that, renting it, if you will, during the early morning and the commuter afternoon times with commuter rail cars. That's the first step in some form of eventual light rail transportation. That, but to get there, you have to have had that thoroughly vetted so that you need federal funds eventually, that it looks feasible. So we're having a study conducted that will analyze 3 options: a bus rapid transit option, which we don't think works because buses still have to use the choked interstate, or commuter rail, which I mentioned to you, or some form of light rail where you use dedicated right-of-way. It's more expensive to build, and they're operational expenses that you have to pay for, but usually require greater density. But rail, that form of commuter rail, we need. The interstate is, just can't be expanded much more, and that's our main corridor. So that's the first one. The second is the Septima Clark, and we will break ground on a $12 million first step in dealing with the drainage. It's $140 million. The city's operating budget is less than that, annual operating budget, and it's U.S. Highway 17. It's a state federal highway system. It's not a city street. So we need to find the rest of the money. Secretary LaHood and I have become good friends in the process, as I have with Secretary Napolitano explaining the Homeland Security components of it, and Secretary Donovan because we've got housing. And so but I'm committed to getting that done, working with the Corps of Engineers and working with the state. And then the port, which Byron mentioned, we have to do that. We can't let up until that's done. We can't even imagine Charleston. Our harbor is the best because we're closer to the Atlantic Ocean. Most harbors, Savannah, they've got to go 20-some, how many miles up the river?
It's about halfway between Atlanta and the open ocean.
Yeah, right, halfway between Atlanta. And ours is right, you can see it, from here. And so that is extremely important. And the bike pad I mentioned, but we're working we work so closely with Buck and his team and several members of the commission here. Would you all please stand and be recognized? Great civic leaders who give their time and energy to we work closely with them, but that's another thing. We have to not rest until we have the bike pad across the Ashley, which the bridge is kind of old, and we might even need a new bridge. I don't know. But lastly, the elephant in the room, which is an elephant that isn't easily mentioned these days, is money. And so we have to find additional revenue for the State Department of Transportation and for the national. We have to. And these aren't easy times to deal with that, but as Governor Rendell mentioned, the citizens understand that. We all know that things cost money. And our voters, by 2/3 vote, with the leadership of so many of you here, voted to build 17 new schools because the voters knew that they were needed, and they were willing. So we have to all work together and not be afraid to find the additional funds for infrastructure improvement. And until we do that, we will be behind the curve, and we need to do it because our economic competitiveness as well as the livability of our state is dependent upon it.
Mayor, that's an important topic. Do we need to, do you think, rethink the way we finance capital projects, taking it out of the normal legislative process? And maybe, Secretary Limehouse, you can talk about the infrastructure bank and the proposal that Secretary LaHood mentioned today.
When I came to DOT in '93, I was handed a book, and it essentially was by a blue ribbon committee that said, these are the projects we need to build for South Carolina. And so we had a clear roadmap as to where we wanted to go, the primary one being the Cooper River Bridge. The one thing they left out was funding. So I I asked our guys at DOT, and they assured me there was no extra money. So we looked at all of the options around, and the 5 or 6 different methods that we use, all of those projects have been completed. There's an old saying, there's a time to plant grapes and there's a time to drink wine. Well, we're drinking the wine, and we're happy to go with Governor Rendell and the leadership in other places, the mayor of Los Angeles and Mayor Riley, and create a new way to do things, thinking outside the box. Money is as cheap as it's ever been. If you are a young couple and you have a job, you don't wait till you have all of the money to build a house. You build the house, you live in the house, and you pay for it over time with an interest rate that's deductible, and in the case of infrastructure, it's tax exempt. But in addition to it being subsidized in that way, you get to use the facility at that time. It goes up in value, and it would have cost you more each year. Randy taught me that when I got to DOT. It's better to finance these things and build them now than have the cost go up each year, Joe, when you build a segment of it. So that's what we did, and it's worked. We just need to expand on those ideas. We need new revenue sources to finance them, and we need a new vision for America.
Any other panelists want to comment?
Well, I guess I would say I think we're fortunate in our region. Our local governments have stepped up and tried to generate revenue, and I think have done a very good job. Unfortunately, it's just not enough, and I agree with the Secretary. We have to have a vision at the national level to address this funding issue. The State DOT Commission approved a federal match program this past year, and had $50 million available. And essentially, if you came with a project that was relatively close to being ready to go, and you had the money, and you needed, maybe the other half of the money, you could come get essentially a dollar for dollar match. And we in this region got almost all of that money. So we're doing all we can do, I think, locally. Our citizens have stepped up in all 3 counties now and have voted to tax themselves to address the infrastructure needs. But quite frankly, it's not going to be enough going forward, and we really have to have a national vision on funding that generates more revenue. It's certainly the danger of asking each county to do it on a county-by-county basis is, a system doesn't recognize county boundaries, but county leadership has to recognize county boundaries. You can't always fix the problem if you can only widen a section of road within your county. So there's a certain danger of not having the ability to plan statewide, region-wide, nationally, if you're trying to do piecemeal. So I agree with the Secretary. It's going to take a national vision. I will comment that I just came back from a FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, Every Day Counts summit, the last one of 10 in Atlanta. I was there the last couple of days at the invitation of the Federal Highway Administrator. It's one of his initiatives, looking at ways to streamline the process, save money, and deliver projects faster. And I'd be remiss if I didn't comment, and while the Commission and the members are here and the Secretary's here, that I was extremely impressed in many of the initiatives that they were discussing. South Carolina was ahead of just about all the other southern states that were there, which was a good many. I wasn't completely surprised, but I was very pleased. Secretary, y'all are doing a great job.
Thank you. By the way, Don Fowler, I don't want to overstate it, but during the reporting process for the ARA funding, South Carolina exceeds their DBE quota on almost every job by a lot, and I think we were a national leader. I know we were a national leader. I just am not sure we were #1 in the United States for exceeding the DBE quota. So I wanted to let you know about that.
Just one other thing on the other part of rail that I didn't mention, on the high-speed rail, because light rail, commuter rail, high-speed rail, are all kind of thrown together. The high-speed rail is the national network where you could get on a train and travel 100 miles an hour east or south or west from here. And so I looked at the high-speed rail plan a couple of years ago and saw that Charleston and the Grand Strand was not on the plan, on the list. So we developed an application, worked with Secretary Limehouse, and submitted it to the federal government to fund the study. The Chamber worked with us because it requires a 20% match, and the Chamber agreed with the chambers in the PD along the coast to work with us to raise the match. And that hasn't been funded yet, but as Secretary mentioned, a couple of states have turned back their high-speed rail funds, and I re-mentioned to the Secretary that application was still in there. I met with the head of the rail, U.S. Rail, in his office, the DOT headquarters in Washington. So we get that funded, I'm confident we will, then that justifies or creates states the feasibility of us being, and I can't imagine there'll be a high-speed rail network in the country that doesn't want to come through Charleston. Then we're on the map. Then we go get the funding. So I think we'll get that, and it's essential. We sure don't want there to be a national high-speed rail network and not have the low country on it, and I can't imagine there will, but that's something we all need to work on.
I didn't want to contradict Secretary LaHood. In fact, I want him thinking that we need some more money down here, but we applied jointly, Secretary Conte in North Carolina and Secretary Smith in Georgia. We have applied and received a grant to do the high-speed rail study from Raleigh to Greenville to Atlanta. So that's in the works as we speak, and so there's more going on than maybe meets the eye around here.
Terrific. To all panelists, many people move to Charleston because of quality of life issues. Is infrastructure development compatible with quality of life issues?
I would say from the port standpoint, absolutely. And as you look back, Bobby was mentioning earlier the history of our chamber here, incredible history. One of the first projects that our chamber worked on was an improvement to the entrance channel. You look at the wonderful buildings around here and what this city historically has to offer. 99.9% of that can be traced back to commerce, and that was international commerce. That's why Charleston was established. So as you do that, you're moving products, you're moving people, but you're also encouraging the exchange of dollars and cents and ideas and products. And to the previous issue of financing and funding, from a trade standpoint, this is a cash cow for our United States Treasury. Every year, companies importing through this port pay over $600 million in customs duties that just go to the general treasury. They're not set aside or I don't want to say earmarked, but I just said it. They're not set aside. They're not specifically noted for port projects. They go to the general treasury. And so trade and transportation and commerce, this is a good investment. Infrastructure is what, the national highway system is what led to the prosperity we enjoyed for so long. So there is a great connection between livability, between our port and commerce and infrastructure development.
And part of the livability is being able to easily and safely get around the community. And that great advantage of this part of the country is that the scale is comparatively easy in that regard, comparatively easy. And so investments in infrastructure that enhance that, add to the quality of life. What we all understand that we have to do now is make the streets complete so that the transportation is not just for the auto, it's for the pedestrian, it's for the biker, and it's for those who wish to or would benefit from using public transportation. One of the things we're working with the South Carolina Department of Transportation on is, and we'll be working with them, is on their standards, because within towns and cities in developed areas, the standards or the requirements for parking or the fact that a narrower lane is more acceptable, and the pedestrian amenities and all of that, and of course, as I mentioned, getting the Cooper River Bridge, so fabulous. Secretary mentioned we got the bike pedestrian lane there. we can't imagine it without it, and we've got to just look at every bridge. We have a master plan for west of the Ashley, where you could eventually go from Drayton Hall. We've got the bike pad now on Highway 61, come down Highway 61, across the railroad, down to Dogwood Road area, into the West Ashley Park, through Carolina Bay, across 17 at a signalized intersection, onto the 10-mile Greenway, and then with the bike pad pedestrian across the Ashley Ridge in the peninsula, you could do a marathon just on a bike pad system west of the Ashley into the peninsula and back. So making sure that every time we look at infrastructure improvement, we think of the completeness of it, and that substantially adds to the livability of the community.
Byron, you inadvertently almost added mentioned the E word, and in Monday's New York Times, there was an article about the race to capture the bounty of the expanding of the Panama Canal. What does Charleston need to do to win that race?
Well, fortunately, we're in a good position now. Back earlier in the last decade, we completed the Charleston 45-foot project. So we have 45 feet of water depth at high tide or low tide here in the port of Charleston. With high tide, we have up to 50 to 51 feet. That means we can move ships, and our pilots do move ships in and out of this port on a regular basis, 1,100 feet long, and they have 2 to 3 feet underneath the keel of the ship at high tide. So you imagine this massive ship holding 8,000 containers with only a couple of feet underneath. So right now we do have the deepest water in the southeast, and we have the opportunity to go deeper at a less cost than any other port in this region. In fact, the Corps of Engineers, when they did the reconnaissance study, determined that this port here in Charleston is the cheapest port in the South Atlantic to get to 50 feet. Why is that important? We already have a 50-foot harbor in Norfolk along the East Coast. New York has a 50-foot harbor. We need, in the southeast, a 50-foot harbor to continue to be able to serve these larger vessels. And again, this isn't a port of Charleston, really. This is a port of the United States. We have tremendous military presence here and tens of thousands of companies across the southeast. So what we need next is to proceed to the feasibility phase of the study. The Corps of Engineers does these projects because, again, the channels are federal. They've been recognized as a federal interest since the 1800s. So the funding that is required over the near term is about $400,000 to advance the next part of that feasibility. That money is not for the Ports Authority. That money is for the Corps of Engineers, who's the federal agency that does these projects. We're going to match it. We have to pay our portion as well. So we're prepared to do that. Overall, this will be about a $300 million project to get us to 50 feet or so. That's maybe a half or a third of some of the other regional projects that, when completed, will only get us what we have in Charleston today. So from a taxpayer investment standpoint, it's really a no-brainer. You want the best bang for your buck, we have it here in South Carolina in the Port of Charleston.
Anyone else want to take a shot at this one?
If I could, one last thing before you pass it along. I'd like to say just a couple words of thanks to Mayor Riley here today, along with those 98 mayors from across the state. We've received great support from industry in South Carolina, from our mayors, from our congressional delegation, and others in pressing this forward. We have the future right here, and we can grab it.
We've talked about the port and rail, but with the arrival of Boeing and the imminent arrival of Southwest, certainly our airport has a lot of attention now focused on it, and it offers tremendous opportunities with all these arrivals. What challenges, what infrastructure challenges confront our airport?
Well, tomorrow, I'm looking at my schedule, it's tomorrow, the Aviation Authority is meeting and working on its master plan, and obviously the great success of our region, and certainly all the work that went into getting Southwest here, which is, going to add 200,000-300,000 more visitors to our community through the airport, as well as enormous benefit to the businesses and to our citizens to substantially reduce the cost of air travel. Huge achievement, and the chamber, everybody, so many people here, Convention Visitors Bureau worked so hard on that. It was, that was a great community coming together sales job. So the Aviation Authority is looking at the future and making sure that we have the capacity, as Governor Randall mentioned yesterday. We were talking with the newspaper that the needs of airports, runways, more obvious, air control, not so obvious, extremely important, but terminal facilities as well. So it's something that we've got a great aviation authority, well positioned, and something that they're very mindful of, making sure we have the infrastructure there to meet the needs of the community.
We've touched on this a little bit. How can all levels of government work better together to address the infrastructure challenges that face the area?
Well, I think we're constantly working at that. I mean, it's always a challenge because, again, if you're an individual county council member in Charleston County or Dorchester County, you first and foremost have to be concerned about your constituents and how you're addressing their specific needs. But we have to continue to work through organizations like ours in which they come to the table, they work together, they set priorities, and they don't always get what they want when they want it, quite frankly. But they've always been very good about setting priorities and criteria in which to arrive at those priorities, which means that we get the best project for the best, for the investment we're making. And I think that the things that the Federal Highway Administration is doing right now with the everyday counts and some of the listening sessions that will be occurring after the first year, the things that have to occur. Part of what we struggle with all the time is the lack of understanding and education of the public as it relates to issues like commuter rail. We often run into folks who say light rail, but what they're talking about is commuter rail. They don't know the difference, which I'll let the mayor talk about commuter rail mostly because he's very passionate about that, fortunately for us. But we get often accused of not supporting light rail. That's not the case at all. We have looked at that particular corridor and that situation, and short term, commuter rail is the most appropriate, cost-effective way to address that need. Doesn't mean down the road that we would not move forward with implementing light rail. It's just we have to move in an incremental manner, particularly as we keep discussing funding. But I think we continue to do those sorts of things. We have a very good system in place at the federal level. It's a planning process. The state, we have criteria, Act 114, many of you are familiar with, that tries to ensure that we put the most needed projects at the top of the list and fund those first and foremost. So we're headed in the right directions. Again, the biggest issue is the funding is just not keeping up with the need.
Larry Hargett is here, and other members of our Charleston Area Transportation Study Commission. Would you all please stand, because those are the wonderful people who help set the and I will tell you that we work so well together. When the allocation of funding through the Recovery Act came to CHATS, the project that was ready to go was Berlin-Myers, and so CHATS adjusted things to make sure that could get going, and we because the projects are analyzed in terms of their competitiveness and readiness, we really do have a very cooperative spirit, and everybody, and we all know that everybody lives regionally. No one, I mean, in a region you live, you work in one place, go to church in another, kids go to school, friends, your kids or whatever. We all have to approach things looking at it not from our own narrow neighborhood or even city, but from a regional standpoint.
Thank you. If it's okay with the panel, we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. So it's a microphone right over here. And
I'm just a retired constituent of the region, And, you know, through the media, the newspapers, TV, meetings like this, you keep hearing people talking about the importance of our port and the need to get this dredging study done. And I can't understand for the life of me why, when you look at the region, the state, and the federal government, why we can't get $400,000 to do this little old study. Could somebody explain that to me, please, so that I can understand it?
It's a comparatively small amount of money. Apparently the way things work is this. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does harbor deepening. If the funding process or the authorization process or the study process is not done through them, it's not that they demand it, it's just that that is a part of the project being considered in the national interest. So it is necessary that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers receive the funding to conduct the study, which the state or the Ports Authority has to match. And so the request for earmarked money, for line item money for the harbor deepening through the Corps of Engineers was important. It's not that the state or that the community couldn't come up with the money. It needs to follow that track because we are in competition with Savannah or with Norfolk or with others, and if it says, well, you know, the Corps didn't do that study, so that's why it has to go that way. And it's just unfortunate that we didn't have the united support of our congressional delegation on that.
The only thing I'd just add to real quickly to that, and the mayor's absolutely right, the Corps of Engineers is a project-funded organization. So as you look at their budget, it says, you know, Charleston deepening or whatever other project there is throughout their entire budget. The budget starts with the president, obviously, and then Congress acts on it. So, yeah, it's not really a matter of the $400,000. There have been two things, I guess, that have been most misunderstood. One, this is not just $400,000. This is probably going to be a $300 million project. So it needs to be cost shared between the federal government and the local sponsor, in this case, South Carolina. The second part that's been most misunderstood is the funding's not coming to South Carolina or to the port. This is funding for the Corps of Engineers to do its job. So the only way they can receive their funding is through congressional action. So that's, at the end of the day, that's really the matter.
And so the mayor's letter, what I sent the letter I'd asked the mayors to sign is to the president so that if the congressional process in play now doesn't work, then we would ask the Obama administration to add that $400,000 study to next year's budget.
To the questioner, sometimes government doesn't make sense, does it?
I'm getting over here next to the door, so if somebody starts throwing things, I can leave. I'd just like to hear some comments of why y'all, as tremendous leaders of our state and our region, think we're so opposed to raising the motor fuel user fee. Here's a simple fact. We do need new ways to fund our highway system. But until we figure out what those new ways are, why don't we go ahead and bite the bullet and raise the user fee some amount to help get us started fixing all these problems. Somebody mentioned yesterday an average citizen might drive 12,000 miles a year. In South Carolina, we pay 16 cents a gallon. So if you drive 12,000 miles a year and say you get 20 miles of the gallon, that's 600 gallons of fuel. 16 cents a gallon is $96 a year for the privilege of riding on 42,000 miles free of state and federally maintained roads. That's a pretty small price to pay. If we doubled it, that's $96 a year. That's $8 a month, 27 cents a day. That's a York peppermint patty when you check out at lunch. And it seems that we ought to just face the fact that it's a user fee, it's not really a tax, and it's the people who use the roads pay for it, and the people who don't.
Who wants to take that?
Well, I guess it's going to fall on me before it's over with anyway. This is what we've been fighting, and Randy knows this because the AGC is a partner, just like the city and the COG and the port. We're partners in this venture, and we try to do everything we can at the Department of Transportation to stretch our dollars and make them go as far as they can. But with the lowest motor fuel tax in the United States, we have to be the most efficient highway department in the United States just to keep up. But we're not going to stay at the C level very long. We're headed for a service level of D, Randy, because of the lack of funding and because we don't have the money to do what we need to do. I, 4 years ago, changed the way we did business around there, and we have a fix-it-first strategy. So we're putting all of our dollars into repair and maintenance of the existing system so that we don't have a bridge collapse or some other catastrophe that would fall upon us because of neglect or because we're out trying to build a new road when we should be fixing the old one. So the answer is we're going to have more funding from somewhere, and we can't just keep pulling rabbits out of the hat. The infrastructure bank is tapped out. I led a delegation to New York to meet with the rating agencies, and we were able to maintain our A rating on 2 large bond issues that we were putting out on behalf of the state and of the infrastructure bank. But they warned us that we are at a point now where we're leveraged to the nth degree. We can't go any further. So if we don't do what the TRAC committee, this is a tax realignment committee that's recommended an increase, we're going to fall further and further behind. And on that same subject, I would say that we need some inflation factor built in so that if gas is $6 a gallon, we don't stay at the same level, that we go up along with it.
What did TRAC recommend?
TRAC recommended 5.5 cents, but they recommended that it be tied to inflation so that it doesn't go. It could go down, but it most likely will go up.
Well, Buck, Secretary, and the Commission deserves a huge amount of credit for the efficiencies that they have effectuated, and which means that our state has had more money to put into the repair and maintenance and construction of our highway infrastructure, and that was really to their enormous credit. But it's it's about political leadership in our state, and the TRAC Commission recommendation is a very reasonable and modest one, and I think, as was stated, Randy stated, it's a user fee. We know that things cost money, and so we need the political leadership in our state government, the governor and the legislature, to support what so clearly is needed. The last time the user fee was created was raised was 1980. What, Randy? 1987. And we all know the cost of everything has gone up, and in our state, I mean, this is about jobs for South Carolina. It's about our competing with North Carolina and Georgia and Alabama and Florida, Tennessee, for jobs and for industrial development and quality and livability. And so we're shortchanging the future when we don't make the necessary investments. And I think tying it and make sure it's used for capital and not for operating, which the Secretary and the Commission would warmly support, would be a good idea. But we need more resources, and we have for a long time. It's time to bite the bullet and do it.
Good time for one more question.
Good morning. We talked earlier about the rail plan, the state rail plan as it pertains to South Carolina, particularly to Charleston and the coastal routes to the Grand Strand and to the Low Country and bringing rail. And can you expound a little bit more on the timeline? I know you guys talked about the another grant being awarded and another study hopefully being approved of when these things will come to a head, when you think at a point where the business community will start getting involved in terms of procurement, design, engineering, and construction?
The grant application is in, and I've said I've met with the head of the U.S. Department of Rail, Transportation, and again, the Secretary is aware of it. So I'm hopeful that the grant will be approved, and they have to study it for its feasibility. You know, that this makes sense, and the high-speed rail map in the U.S. is not a recent one, and what the head of the U.S. Rail told us that often it was submitted for a purpose years and years ago of making rail and highway intersection signals eligible for federal funding. That wasn't, and I mean, we've gone a long way since then. So it's to make sure that it's considered feasible. I'm sure it will be. You know, we got 4.4 million visitors in Charleston. They got, I don't know how many they got in Savannah and Grand Strand. So if you just look at the nation and say we're going to have a network of high-speed rail and one doesn't connect this, you know, this part of the country together, it doesn't make any sense. So the application is in there. We're working very hard to get it funded. The study will be done, and then I'm confident it'll be approved. We'll be on the map. Then we go, you know, for the capital funding, and I think that's something our country increasingly is going to want to invest in.
And that's inclusive of the whole state, not just the Low Country. I concentrated on that.
No, well, actually, as the Secretary mentioned, there's a corridor from Raleigh through the Piedmont to Atlanta that's in. There's also a corridor that connects Columbia down to Savannah. And again, those plans, I don't know how old they are. They've been in there a long time. I think when there wasn't a likelihood of, you know, great investment. So when I saw the map and saw that Charleston wasn't in it, then I worked with Secretary Limehouse and worked with our staff, Hernan Pena's here, and worked with Mary Graham in the chamber to put together our application. And we communicated with the chambers in the eastern part of South Carolina to get with us, because I felt the duty for the region to make sure we were on the map.
We have one questioner here who's been trying to get a question.
I'd like to add my welcome to the governor to South Carolina. I am a crossover from the Airport Commission to the Highway Commission. So what I'm about to say is some unfinished work that I was working on when I was at the airport. On a serious note, I was thinking of security, and I'm very concerned about this. We did lots of work on the airline side on security, and of course you know it's obvious why we had to do that. And I would just advise that as we work together to strengthen and improve the port, that we don't take our eyes off of nor go to sleep on security, because that's just the time in which we live. The other thing is with relationship to the transportation bill, I would strongly encourage those who have influence in the writing of that bill to put some lines in there that would cause the Congress to police itself, get that one, police itself, about dipping into the trust fund and spending the money otherwise. Now, there was lots of money in that trust fund. I've been tracking it for years. But when we looked around, so much money had been dipped out of the trust fund and spent otherwise. And so I just want to run that caution up. So when the bill is written, you may want to put those lines in there in order to protect it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Would you all please join me in thanking Mayor Riley, Secretary Limehouse, Byron Miller, and Ron Mitchell for a wonderful panel.
Thank you. And I know I see in the room, some towards the back, some members of my city council. If they would please stand and be recognized, because obviously whatever the city does is done through and with them. Thank you for being here.
Before we move to the next segment, I'd just like to thank Mayor Riley. He is the unsung hero here that brought this together. We've got community leaders, we've got transportation executives, we've got what we need here to make a difference in America and in South Carolina, and I'd just like to thank Mayor Riley.